Good afternoon and good morning across the world. This is Michael Gendre. I'm the host and producer of Dare to Know with Michael Gendre. And today we are in Sarasota, Florida, and I'm privileged to have as a guest Patrick Madden, who's a friend of mine. We've known each other for quite some time. And today happens to be the day after St. Patrick's Day. That's why I brought my hat for you.
I thank you very much. I'm honored.
So, Pat,
Yes.
you are somebody from Boston, from the Boston area.
Very much so.
You grew up in?
I grew up in South Boston, Massachusetts. At the time, Whitey Bulger was loose.
Okay, that's a few decades ago, maybe?
Yeah, a few. I'm 58 now.
Okay.
I was.
And you went to medical school,
I
correct?
did.
And you became a neurologist.
I did. I went to Boston College High School,
Yeah?
and the movie Spotlight was my year of my class. Then I went to Boston College. 4 years, and I was originally pre-veterinarian, and when I went to Boston College I decided to go pre-medical instead. And then I was originally going to go into family practice, and I ended up, back then it was extremely hard to get into medical school. It was almost 4 applicants per seat, and I got in on my own, and I got into Albany Med in upstate New York, which is an interesting place. It was where they discovered seasonal affective disorder. There's so much cloud cover. And we used to joke and say the best view of Albany's in the rear view mirror, but that's a little unfair. It was a good experience, very good for clinical. And then I went to Boston for private practice for a year and a half with a group that we ended up suing each other and everything. I went on my own and was on my own ever since.
So you've been a neurologist since the late 70s or early 80s?
No. I've been in training since in the 90s. So I've been in the early 90s on. I've been in private practice or in practice in the real world.
Okay.
Not training.
So at some point, not too long ago, you had to leave Massachusetts, correct?
Yes. 7 years and 5 months ago. Not that I keep track.
Good. Yeah, right. Yeah. Could you tell us in the general gist, like 2 or 3 minutes, on how come you had to leave Massachusetts?
Massachusetts considered itself the flagship for some of the healthcare changes that they wanted to impose in the United States. This actually comes from Senator Ted Kennedy. He's ultimately the responsible. One of the first things he put into place was something called HIPAA, H-I-P-P-A-A, I believe. It's an acronym about the healthcare records. It mainly meant, although most people don't realize it, it mainly meant that the federal government, any aspect of it, would have access to a patient's medical records if they signed off on it. It's a long story I won't get into now. But then later came the Affordable Care Act, unquote, and that had its own issues. Massachusetts decided to ramp it up. They wanted to call themselves the flagship for Obamacare, they called it. And they did some changes for the eastern third of Massachusetts, where 2/3 of our population is. And as a result, many doctors retired early, left the state. Most of us went to New Hampshire. The second most popular place was Portland, Maine. And I chose Florida because my billing lady's son ran the business for my billing, and he was in sunny Sarasota.
Wow, interesting. Was it difficult because you have 2 kids? 2 or 3 kids?
I have 3 children,
Three, okay.
but they're now in their mid-20s.
Right, okay.
And so it was a nightmare.
It was a nightmare for you, your wife, and your 3 children.
It was, and it tested our marriage. And around that time of the move was the Boston bombing, we all know.
Yes.
And my daughter was the main babysitter for the 8-year-old that died, and she almost died. So she's doing very well.
Very good.
And my younger boy's a nurse now. He was at the Brigham. He's doing travel nursing now. He's been at Stanford in California. He wants to go to Seattle, of all places.
Very
And then the older boy wants to be a professor. Kind of like you, Dr. Gendre.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you. And more in literature, that's what he likes.
Yes. Well,
There you go.
We can talk to him at some point.
I would enjoy that. Yeah, I know he would too.
So what I'd like to do today is talk about this book, because this book just came out, like today.
No, today.
Today.
You are
right?
correct.
That's today.
I went to the
this
publisher
book
today.
Came out today. And I have to reveal to the audience, to the people watching us, that you and I have been talking about this book and other booklets that you have written. This is kind of a booklet, but book also.
Correct.
It has 119 pages.
Correct.
And we have been talking about this book and other booklets for at least 3 or 4 months, correct?
Particularly last 3-4 months, correct?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
So I would like to talk to you about this book today
I'm
because the title of the book is The Game as Played, and it has the general title for the series, I guess, right? Children of the Sand?
Correct.
Okay, and then there's a subtitle to the book, which is in Latin,
Correct.
Sic Semper Tyrannis,
Correct.
which in Latin means thus.
It's a contraction, so it's an idiom.
Yeah.
It means thus always to the tyrant, but the full quote I'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yes.
I have to tell you, I researched, or I had somebody research, so my goddaughter in Paris, she researched it, and she found that the flag, the seal for Virginia was...
Correct.
You know that, okay.
I do.
Okay.
I actually have one. I would have brought it if I had known.
Next time we will
I
have
will.
that in the back.
I have it.
So tell us a little bit about this book, how it came about. And I have to say, first and foremost, that
Yes, sir.
I think you are a conservative of sorts.
I believe in individual, independent thought.
Okay, and so that's sort of my definition of conservatism, which is common sense and just based on evidence of what works and doesn't work. That's my general sense of how things...
I concur.
You concur. So if you would, could you tell us how this was conceived, how it came all about? And I think this is a book that you told me to read, and I read it. It was fascinating. So maybe you want to start with this book?
Sure. I'll just talk from the top.
Sure.
When healthcare, about 5 years before the Affordable Care Act was in existence, I had thought that when I would retire, I would write books. I was thinking of 3 in particular about neurology for the average person.
Right.
And it would be, the series would be Children of the Sand, because all of humanity is descended from the African bush, or sand, or Hottentots in the Dutch.
Right.
They're fascinating people, but they're hunter-gatherer, and we found in medicine that those people who live closer to our ancient hunter-gatherer ways live much more healthfully, both psychiatrically and physically. It's
So
amazing.
it started off as a scientific project, so to speak.
Yes, but it was going to be just fun when I would retire.
Right.
But then things happened in 2012, particularly, and kept accelerating, and I had to leave my state. Now, my mother's side, next month will be our 400th anniversary of her coming to Plymouth, and it was hard. New Englanders generally don't leave, but I did. So as a catharsis, instead of going to the first 3 books, which I was going to do in retirement, I thought, assuming those 3 that aren't technically in existence yet, I would do this one book. And I wanted to know, why does giant government keep recurring over and over again in history? Years ago, I had read this book, the one you're referring
Right.
to.
Now, this is a fascinating book by Shafarevich, who tell the audience who he was.
Oh, sure. He was actually Igor Shafarevich was a mathematician. There are geometric theorems named after him. He was part of the underground in the Soviet Union. One of his closest friends was the famed novelist and writer and essayist, brilliant speaker, Alexander Isovich Solzhenitsyn. Solzhenitsyn, many people feel, with Pope John Paul II and Ronald Reagan are the reasons the Soviet Union collapsed. He was the one that wrote the original Gulag stories, the acronym GULAG, the Gulag Archipelago specifically. And he, in fact, in the beginning of this book of Shafarevich's, introduces Shafarevich to the world. Also, Solzhenitsyn spoke of Shafarevich in his Harvard commencement speech in 1979.
Really? I did not realize.
Oh, it's the reason I went to find this book.
So
because of his
you
speech.
actually were at Harvard when you delivered it?
I did. I was not. I was a junior in high school
Okay.
when Alexander Solzhenitsyn spoke at Harvard. It was the Harvard commencement. It was
Right.
in June 2000.
No,
not 2000. Excuse me.
No.
19. What was it? It's got to be 79.
Yeah.
19, it's 1978.
79, right.
I think it was 78.
So then
78,
you discovered this book, you read it, you thought you were very impressed by it,
Very much so.
and then you kept it at the back of your mind, so to speak, right?
Right. Well, the Berlin Wall fell. Everyone thought, "Oh,
Yeah.
what does this mean?"
Right.
Etc. It's interesting. This particular book apparently came out in 1975. Believe it was first in Russian and then French, and then it went throughout the world.
Global?
Yeah.
Oh, really? Well, it's not exactly well known by academics, I can tell you
It
that.
is not. It is
No,
not.
no.
Which is interesting because he used the scientific method for his
Right.
book. The purpose of his book, The Socialist Phenomenon, is to explain why throughout history and time we have giant governments. What I find
Right.
frustrating, and a lot of people do, is the term socialist to Central and Eastern Europe means giant government, or we would say statism.
Right.
Whereas in the West, the more Western West, we would say, well, there's socialism, there's the divine right of kings, there's this,
Right,
that,
right.
there's different means to giant government, all of which is statism. So
Yeah.
they make a distinction in my book.
Yeah, I agree with you. You make a very good you made a good decision to talk about statism, because all these varieties of statism, whether they're communist, fascism, or the rest, they
Or just
actually
a
end
dictator.
Right, right. But in this case, so tell us how the idea then came to you to get involved in doing this one in particular.
I noticed with this book in 1975 that it was extremely erudite, extremely
Erudite.
thorough.
Explain what the word erudite means.
Erudite?
Means
Well,
scholarly,
very well researched,
Yeah.
very careful to
Yeah.
never to make an attestation, but to make a claim that was
Yeah.
derived from logic
Correct.
and derived from facts that
Right,
were
right.
uncontested.
Right. Yeah. Now,
So
this
so
is-
what I did is, I apologize, was I took his book, brought it to the 21st century with
Right.
all the new history and issues that we didn't found, and I added neurology, psychiatry, psychology.
Right.
That's what I did.
Yeah, I can. I obviously this is part of your book, which is that of a researcher and a scientific researcher at that. But what I find truly amazing in this book is that you not only do the right sort of research, but you also have quotes from these very famous authors that sort of shed an amazing light on your point. I mean, I just opened it up, page 50.
Yes.
So there's this quote, I mean, there's plenty of quotes all along, from Voltaire. It is difficult to free fools from the chains they revere.
Yes.
I mean, I can open up another page randomly. This is Erik Erikson. Well, he's a well-known person. Adolescence is thus vital regenerator of the process of social evolution. For youth, selectively offers its loyalties and energies to the conservation of that which feels true to them, and to the correction or destruction of that which has lost its regenerative powers
Well,
or significance.
yes.
So this is Erik Erikson. I mean, I find these quotes absolutely fascinating. How did you call them? How did you sort of pick them up? You must have been reading things for decades and picked up those.
Actually, the last 7 years, most
7
of
years,
it.
okay.
But what I've done though, it's a very strange book. Igor Shafarovich, he used the scientific method. It was very, very carefully scholarly. It's something that I would read as a physician all the
Right,
time.
right.
Normal people can't read them. We are now dealing with millennials and people in the internet age, and as a result, it's almost an ADD, ADHD world.
Right.
And I find it repulsive, but that's how it is. So, and people want to feel things, and so the style here is of this book that I tried to make in booklets, I should say, of the 5 booklets that make one book. This style is one of Oprah magazine, of all things. I did that
Yeah.
to her. I wanted people to feel it. So she would have a quote, say, and then have a few
Right,
paragraphs
right.
or something. So I took that and ramped it up to the nth degree, and I did what I did. I blended it all. So I have
Yeah.
neurology, history, psych,
And
sociology,
poetry,
music. I have
music.
sculpture. I did that on purpose.
Yeah.
I want to have people feel it.
Yeah, no, I find it very impressive. It just
Thank you.
just does. It's fantastic. It's a Chinese saying. I just opened page 33. Even the man who knows 1,000 things should consult the man who knows one.
Yeah, that's a humility.
Yes.
What's this old saying? Everyone is my teacher in that I might learn from him or her.
Yes, very good. So what are you going to say to my students and others who will pick up this book? What is there anything they should know or they should be ready for?
In the big picture sense and then specific sense.
Yeah.
In the big picture sense, we as human beings, and to me the best models are those from whom we're descended, the African bush or sand.
Right.
We were meant to live better than we're living now.
That's fascinating.
Thank you.
I find it totally fascinating because it's true that the way we eat in the West, in America, in Europe, often it's just too rich, it allows too much sugar and carbs, right?
Boy, that's a polite understatement, yes. In the African bush culture, for example, the men will go out on the hunt. The women and children never see simple sugars. And simple sugar is honey. And once a year, the men go on a hunt and they will smoke out African bees who can sting you many times, but they're not serious stings. They smoke them out and they eat wax pupae and honey and all once a year. That's their sugar. They eat no simple sugar the whole year.
Wow. So the Africans have the key to have had the key to a lot of amazing things for a very long time, right? I mean,
the African bush.
Original African
Other
bush.
Africans are more like the rest of us.
Right.
We're all dysfunctional, except in my opinion, the true hunter-gatherers.
Okay, so that's the thing. Yeah,
that's the thing.
It just hasn't been known as the reason why they were actually more functional.
Correct. Well, they didn't really. First of all, people thought little of them, and they also the people are very protective of their culture,
right,
and their religion, particularly.
And their religion.
Yes.
Well, that's one thing to keep in mind. Obviously, that explains Children of the Sand, and we should.
Right. So it was going to be the 3 that I was going to do when I retire.
Yes.
The first 3 books. And then this is the 4th book in 5 parts, and this is the first of the 5 parts. Yeah. Seek Semper Tyrannis is the big one, and this is the first booklet. The game is played, correct?
So, explain the concept of the game as played. What is it really? I mean, I think I understand what it is, but could you explain what it is?
Again, the timing's impeccable in life.
Yes.
You and I have spoken of a term, synchronicity.
Correct, we have.
Oh my gosh. The 5 booklets are to show, taking Shafarevich to this century and adding the neurology and psychiatry and psychology, was to show why I think giant government occurs throughout history and time. The tug of war between the people and the government. And this first booklet tries to give a lot of background and so that you begin to understand the rest of the book and how we get to giant government. And that mainly is summed up in one word: swarming. Swarming.
Right. So we have had these wonderful conversations, you in Sarasota and me in Boston, and many times we talked about the lie and the din and the swarming that happens with these people who are essentially deranged, but for a reason or for no reason, they just happen to buy a lie, and then they make a lot of noise about it, right? And then they, in their anxiety to control things which they can't, they swarm around themselves and others to spread this disease, right?
It's an interesting term, disease. It is.
Yeah.
The swarm. What I did throughout the book is many of these ideas are known, much of which was neglected, much as Shafarevich's book. And I tried to take them like you remember when we had in the 1970s and 80s, we had the AIDS quilts. People would put stories together, and together it became a giant, beautiful story. And that's what I tried to do. Then I juxtaposed very well known, or maybe not known, scholarly people with their different ideas. The swarm idea comes from The Smart Swarm was the name of a book.
So there is a form of swarm.
Well, that was the name of his book, and he was looking at how groups of living things, animal things, be they dolphins, be they herds of wildebeest or human beings or whatever, and in groups, the weird different things that can happen.
Right, obviously, right.
But one feature particularly was fascinating to me in his book, and I applied it here for this booklet, and that is called locust formation.
That's right.
The swarming of locust formation, and that was remarkable.
So this is extremely interesting. We have had many conversations on this book, but we've also talked about not only neurology, of which you're a specialist, but also we've talked about psychiatry and
psychology, not so much sociology.
Not so much, but we've definitely talked about people who are called psychopaths.
Yes, sir.
Right, and you have brought my attention to a book that I found fascinating. I mean, a couple of books by Stout. Could you explain the
Absolutely.
Could you just talk to me
in my 7-year catharsis, I guess we could call it, that helped me try to get Semper and Tyrannis together. I wanted to understand why giant government occurred, and I learned that in most fields of thought, they tend to view all human beings as wired the same. We're not.
We're not.
We each have the way we're wired. We might be ADD, ADHD. We might be of the affective disorder spectrum. We might be of the autism spectrum. We might be psychopaths. We might be whatever. And even subdivisions thereof.
Yes.
And it's fascinating. When I was in medical school, I learned some fascinating things. One was, if you had a room full of people, let's say 50 people that never knew each other, they were not related genetically, never knew each other, they would spontaneously aggregate or congregate.
Yes.
And they wouldn't know they'd do it. And they would do that based on personality type. Personality type. So the autism spectrum would tend to cluster, and the manic, I'm using that term loosely, forgive me, in psychiatry, that's heresy what I just said. But the affective disorder, the overly upbeat forms versus the depressants versus the ADD, ADHD people. And they don't even know they're doing it. And it's spontaneous. But it isn't just that. It's also, besides how you're wired, what your personality type is, it's the belief system or hat. How we're wearing our hats today. The hat you choose to wear. Mm-hmm. You construct your thought as a teenager, as Dr. Erickson was saying, and then you begin to understand thought and try to think of how you are in the world and where your place is in it, and how you should be with the community, and then it goes from there.
So that was one major book by Martha Stout.
Her book is called now this is the problem, these definitions have not been standardized. She uses the term sociopath. I'm a neurologist, I would say psychopath. She and I mean the same thing.
Yeah, I understand.
I'm sorry.
I have such an interest in this phenomenon because it's part of ethics to explain that life lived well entails, first of all, to focus on yourself, so sort of well-focused egoism, and then inevitably you get meaning in your life in addition by essentially doing good things for others. That's altruism. And in my encounters with, I would say, probably 3 major psychopaths in my life, I realized that there are individuals in this world that totally lack it, this empathy and sense of really what altruism is. And so this has really forced me to reassess how the humanities are essentially taught. If people in the field of the humanities don't understand what truly is entailed by psychopathy. Do you concur?
I concur, but I never realized the ramifications of what I was writing.
Okay.
I'm a neurologist. Every day I deal with neurobehavior disorders. Mm-hmm. I deal with people with strokes. I deal with people with head traumas. Mm-hmm. And some of these people acquire personality types that they didn't have before their injuries.
Right.
And I began to realize the overlap of psychiatry and neurology, that they're becoming one again. They had been one, separated because of Freud and Dr. Sigmund Freud and Dr. Freudnik. and then they've come back together.
They have come back.
More and more. Yeah.
Yes.
But the key was Dr. Martha Stout's book, The Sociopath Next Door.
Right.
Yeah, she's a psychologist in Cape Cod, Massachusetts,
Right.
where you guys hail.
Right.
And she has saved many people from spousal abuses. And then you begin to realize with her research and her knowledge, and that's how I began to realize how this works. That certain personality types and their interactions with others are what make giant government happen.
Right. And there is a form of abuse that's coming out of some of these individuals. That,
Why?
yeah, right, no kidding.
You're being nice.
No, I'm being very nice. No,
Nice.
And in my, it's really a severe thing as far as I can tell, because there's so much going on in the academic world in terms of being forced or being part of a one-track type of thing, one type of niche type of thinking. I find that very few individuals talk to one another across different fields. I mean, I was privileged to encounter, one man who also understood that, and that was Nicholas Sanchez, who taught at Holy Cross College, and we co-wrote a book together. And now I'm very interested in you. I'm also very interested in what's going on in the field of life coaching. So there's this wonderful life coach. Her name is Lisa A. Romano, and the way she explains the abuse that takes place in a lot of families, that takes place in the society, because the societal, there's societal abuse.
Is it a microcosm or a macro? Yep, I agree.
And I think all these things have to be put together. So
yes, I agree.
This will be work to continue, if you don't mind.
Not at all. I'm honored. Yeah.
And I would like to, at some point, maybe do a Skype with you, me in Boston. I mean, you here in Sarasota, and myself in the Boston area.
I hope at least you've had a good time in Sarasota, however brief.
Well, yeah, I went
all the
swimming.
crazy circumstances of
The
the
food
world.
was fantastic.
Excellent.
And the people are very friendly.
Very gracious here.
Very gracious.
I agree.
So,
Southern charm and more.
and more. Very good. Well, I think we're probably running out of time for the half-hour segment, and we'll continue at another time.
I would enjoy that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Thank you, sir.